This week on Jerusalem Dateline, from the Turkish-Syrian border to Iraq and the Persian Gulf, we examine the hotspots throughout the Middle East and a report on the rise of anti-Semitism around the world. Plus, Scott Ross takes a Gaza border reality tour.
A few rockets don't scare us, first of all. We have faith in God.
All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. After weeks of concern over a potential Turkish invasion against a new Syrian democracy, U.S. and Turkish negotiators reached an agreement on a safe zone. But the deal sparked concern among the strong American ally there and thousands of Christians in the region. This is the safe zone to be established on the border between Turkey and northeast Syria. According to the agreement, the U.S. and Turkey will rapidly address Turkey's security concerns. President Erdogan calls the area of northeast Syria a terror swamp. Establish a joint operations center to manage the safe zone, although it's unclear who will oversee this operation. And rename the safe zone a peace corridor. Negotiations took place under the shadow of invasion threats by Turkey's President Erdogan into this region. Erdogan's threats center on a new democracy called SANS, or the Self-Administration of Northeast Syria. For years, the group served as chief ally of the U.S. against ISIS.
What we have in the northeast of Syria is a political system that has provided peace for this region in Syria, and that has provided a vision for the region.
Syrian leaders like Bassam Itzhak worry this agreement threatens their new democracy. For example, the part that says every effort shall be made so that displaced Syrians can return to their country. He fears they will include Islamist groups who have been Erdogan's allies.
Basically, it's gangs who mostly were either members of ISIS or members of Nusra. So it's basically defeating ISIS in one place and then bringing them under a rebrand name. It will be a total surrender by the U.S. to the pressure of Turkey and to the pressure of the ruling party of Turkey, which is an Islamist extremist party.
Syrian Christian groups have reached out to U.S. leaders to intervene on their behalf with President Trump. Many believe 100 years after the Armenian genocide, the 100,000 Christians in the region are once again at risk.
From the perspective of the Christians who live in northeast Syria, the old bully is following them into where they came to safety under the pretext of a safe zone.
In addition to the Turkish-Syrian border, the Persian Gulf and Iraq are two flashpoints in a geopolitical battle involving the U.S., Israel, Iran, and now Russia. This could lead to major problems in one of the world's most strategic regions. For months, Iran has harassed international shipping in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Now comes news that Russia is preparing to join the fray in these key waterways.
We know by the Iranian media that Russia is trying to exploit the current crisis in order to fulfill its strategic aim of having expanded military forces in the Persian Gulf. So the Iranian Navy revealed that it's going to be a mutual drill between Moscow and Tehran in the Persian Gulf.
Down under in Australia, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is making his case for the West to unite in protecting shipping from Iranian aggression.
So what we've asked 60-plus nations to do is provide assistance in securing and deterring from and securing the Strait of Hormuz so that commercial vessels can travel through there.
But Mansharov says Russia's presence will embolden the Islamic Republic.
The more that Iran feels secured, it is encouraged to keep challenging the U.S. and the Europeans in this strategic location of the Hormuz Strait. And you can assume that Iran would continue to seize oil vessels of the U.S. and the Western countries in this region.
And complicating the U.S.-Russia relationship, U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman says he'll be stepping down. In his resignation letter, he urged President Trump to stand up to Putin. He said, going forward, we must continue to hold Russia accountable when its behavior threatens us and our allies. Meanwhile, an attack against 2 Iranian-backed militia bases operating inside Iraq. Most suspect Israel, which, if true, would be its first strike inside Iraq since Israeli planes knocked out a nuclear reactor in 1981.
The reason this is happening is because there's been a very deeply felt concern in the Israeli security establishment in recent months at the prospect of the Iranians placing short-range ballistic missiles in the hands of their Iraqi Shia militia clients, who would then deploy those missiles in western Iraq and thus have Israel within range of those missiles for the first time.
Spire and Mancherov say Iran's leaders play a dangerous game of flexing their muscles while keeping an eye on the U.S. political calendar. They maintain Iran hopes Trump will lose so they can deal with a more pliable White House. Well, here in Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu denounced the terrorist murder of Devir Sorek, a young Israeli soldier and Jewish seminary student. The IDF found Sorek's body stabbed to death near the Israeli settlement of Migdal Oz.
These vicious terrorists come to uproot and we come to plant. They come to destroy, we come to build. Our hands will reach those who seek to harm us, and we will strengthen our roots in our homeland.
Israeli forces continue to search in the nearby Palestinian Arab village of Bet Farjar. They believe the attack was planned and not just a chance killing. Mourners gathered outside the home of Sorek in Ofra.
Dvir was a very gifted boy, 19 years old. He was a musician. He wrote poems. He was a child of nature. He really connected to the land, to the trees, to the nature.
Sorek would have soon celebrated his 19th birthday. He was born shortly before his rabbi grandfather was murdered in a terror attack 19 years ago. Well, that's just one example of anti-Semitism. And now the world's leading Jewish organizations gathered in New York recently to discuss what can be done about the global rise of anti-Semitism. The situation for Jews in Europe is becoming more and more dangerous, and it's coming to America. Dale Hurd has the story from Brussels.
Adolf Hitler would have loved it, afloat in this year's carnival parade in the Belgian city of Aalst. It featured a Nazi-style depiction of greedy Jews sitting on a pile of money, one with a rat on his shoulder. And when confronted by Jewish groups, the town mayor defended it. This is the same carnival that in 2013 featured a Nazi railroad car carrying Jews to a death camp. Sometimes the evidence of anti-Semitism in Europe is obvious, and sometimes it's subtle, like when Jews quietly leave a neighborhood because it isn't safe anymore. I traveled through Brussels with Jewish leader Joel Rubenfeld to visit his boyhood synagogue, which had to be sold because the area became too dangerous for Jews.
I felt insecure coming here with my family. So it's a better thing that we left this place and that we go to a safest place.
Jews have been in Brussels since the 1st century. They're still here, but many are leaving because of anti-Semitism and threats of violence.
It's not the alia, the big alia, but the internal alia. People who are leaving their city, remaining in the same country, leaving their city to go to a safer city. Or people leaving their neighborhood because they feel threatened as a Jew there in this neighborhood and going to another neighborhood where they feel more secure.
The Jewish Museum in Brussels, where an Islamic terrorist killed 4 people in 2014, shows the 2,000-year history of the Jews in Belgium. But it's the more recent history that Europeans seem to be forgetting.
So it's people who say, yes, but it's not anti-Semitic, it's humor. But you know, this kind of humor is killing Jews. Meaning Jews have the power, Jews have the money, Jews have the control. All these very basic anti-Semitic cliches.
In Germany last year, violent attacks against Jews almost doubled. In Britain, anti-Semitic incidents have risen for a 3rd year in a row. Anti-Semitism even began to show itself in France's Yellow Vest movement. In Paris, American writer Nidra Poller says it showed that revolts against the wealthy and powerful inevitably turn against Jews.
Anti-Semitism is something like the fumes and the fire that come up out of the center of society when the surface is crackling apart.
A new Hudson Institute poll shows most Americans now believe anti-Semitism is growing in the United States. It's already infected the Democratic Party. And Rubenfeld has a warning to Christians. You're next.
More problems will come, you know. It's just the beginning. We know this. We know that about anti-Semitism, that anti-Semites, they start with Jews, but they never finish with Jews.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, Brussels.
Coming up, Scott Ross takes a reality tour on the border of Gaza. Find out why these Israelis choose to live in a war zone. Rockets, firebombs, and tunnels along the border. Those images are what most of the world know about the Gaza Strip. But what's it really like to live there? CBN's Scott Ross visited the area for a Gaza border reality tour. Here's part one of this exclusive report.
Eliyahu McLean lives and works in Israel along the border with Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip.
So we are about 7 miles in this direction from the Gaza border. This is Moshav Yoshivia.
You're in direct line of fire here.
Yes, 3 weeks ago, during the Sabbath, I was just finishing prayers here, and I had just walked home at 10 a.m., and we hear red alert, Tseva Adom, from this siren. And as soon as we heard red alert, in our houses, we have to run to a safe room.
Hamas launched nearly 700 rockets at southern Israel that weekend. How much time do you have?
You basically have about 10 to 15 seconds. Seconds to run into the room that's called a safe room.
Why do you choose to live in this sort of an environment with a family?
Yes, first of all of Israel is under rocket threat.
Yeah, but not like this.
Many Israelis have discovered this part of the Holy Land is actually quality of life. A few rockets don't scare us, first of all. We have faith in God, that God is going to protect us.
And He does.
And yes, and this is sovereign Israel. And if we're going to run from here, we might as well run from Tel Aviv. We might as well run from wherever we are in Israel. The word here is resilience.
McLean took me to his synagogue, showed me the Torah scrolls, and introduced me to his neighbors. When the situation is tense, he said they sing and dance. McLean introduces visitors to the complicated situation on the border by giving what he calls the Gaza Border Reality Tour. Visitors get a glimpse of the complexities of life on both sides of the border.
And we're looking on the outskirts of the first third of Gaza Strip, looking in the direction of the Mediterranean. And looking to the left, this is already Gaza City. Remember, this is a city of 1 million people, and you're talking in all of Gaza, 2 million people. That is a lot of humanity. So I want you to also see the border here. You see there's a border fence here.
Yes.
And you see Israeli army lookout posts. And if you look slightly to the left, you can see a mound of earth on the other side. You can see a Hamas lookout post. By the way, wave to Hamas. As we're looking at them, they're looking at us. The enemy is just that close.
They could take a shot at us now?
They could, but they see that we're journalists and tourists, and we're not going to be targeted.
Standing along the international border, we could see the Israeli town of Sderot. And just 45 miles up the coast is Israel's second largest city of Tel Aviv. On the map, McLean showed me the reality.
The area in blue are what doesn't exist anymore. This were the Israeli communities, the settlements of Gush Katif. In 2005, the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon uprooted the 7,000 Israeli in about 23 communities.
Had to uproot everything.
But the tragedy wasn't just the uprooting, but they left behind all of the greenhouses that were top of the world. And the Palestinians from Gaza were working there. They could have maintained it, but Hamas decided to destroy the greenhouses and use it as a launching pads to fire rockets. So it's a little bit of what you call shooting yourself in the foot.
Hamas did the same thing with electricity.
One of the ironies is that in the 2014 Gaza war, Hamas was firing rockets that destroyed that power station, which in fact supplies over 30% of the electricity to the same people that they live among. Isn't that ridiculous?
So Israelis are supplying power
That's right.
to Hamas.
Well, to the people of Gaza, that unfortunately certain leadership elements don't necessarily take into account the needs of the simple people who are not everybody, are necessarily those involved in the conflict.
Last year, Gazans only had 4 hours of electricity per day in summer, and that creates problems for Israel.
So recently, the Israeli government even allowed money from a government called Qatar to revive the power stations. So now there's 12 hours a day of electricity. So why is electricity important in Gaza? First of all, it's very hard in the heat of the summer or the cold of the winter to have no heating or air conditioning. If there's no electricity, the water treatment plants, like last year, will start pouring untreated sewage into the Mediterranean. Do you know which way the currents are carrying that untreated sewage? To Ashkelon.
That's where one of Israel's largest water desalination plants is.
If untreated sewage from Gaza reaches there, what will happen to our saltwater treatment plant? It's pumping water from the Mediterranean. It's meant to purify salt. It's not a sewage treatment salt desalination plant. Do you understand?
Yes. But McLean says just fighting the terrorists isn't enough.
And do you see the dilemma that Israel has? These days, even Hamas, as extreme radical Islamists as they are comparatively the moderates. You have Islamic Jihad. You have ISIS of Sinai and their compatriots in Gaza. So if we topple them, who will replace them? But at the same time, to remember the people just on the other side. We in Israel say, why should it be our responsibility? Egypt doesn't want them, Syria doesn't want them, and Jordan doesn't want them. Nobody in the Arab world wants them. You understand? So in the end, Israel ends up with the responsibility.
Up next, part 2 with Scott Ross on his Gaza border tour. As we've shown you, life along the Gaza border is rough, but residents aren't about to run away. Do they have hope for a different future? Take a look.
Eliyahu McLean lives just 7 miles from the border of the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip. He gives the Gaza border reality tour and told me about the most recent challenges facing residents there. What construction is going on here now?
So Israel is in the process of building across the 45-kilometer border from the northern Gaza all the way to the Egyptian border, an underground barrier. Because right here is where some of the underground tunnels were built by Hamas, and the fighters popped up here. So up to 50 yards deep, all the way to the underground aquifer, Israel is drilling holes, filling it with cement, and in between the different cement pillars are sensors. Basically, they're creating an impenetrable underground barrier that no tunnel can make it under.
The most recent border disruptions for more than a year include massive violent protests and fire kites or balloons. This is one of the kites that
that was sent over the border from Gaza. You can see on the edge, it's a kerosene piece of cloth that they lit on fire. If you look closely, you see the Arabic writing. And this kite, the idea was that it would land in a field or a forest across the Israeli border and light things aflame.
Does it work?
Unfortunate reality is that we've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of agricultural produce.
Whoa.
We've had thousands and tens of thousands of acres of national parkland totally burned to the ground. Sometimes it's in the form of balloons. And it's very hard to tell children, you see balloons in the sky, you want to run after it, that there might be a warhead on the end of the balloon. The idea is that we on this side are going to send kites back with a message of peace, that we in Israel didn't come to displace you from a country called Palestine. We came back home to the Holy Land, not to be in a constant war with our neighbors, but to live in peace with our neighbors.
Good overcomes evil.
Good overcomes evil.
Light overcomes darkness. Our final stop was one of the fields burned by a kite or a balloon just 2 weeks earlier.
It's a statement of desperation that the people there are suffering under a leadership that's squelching freedom on the other side of the border. So it's in some essence also a message of cry for help and a desperation.
Are you hopeful?
Ultimately, out of the ashes comes a new life. Shir Hadash, Ruach Hadash, a new spirit will emerge. And that new spirit is the spirit of determination, the spirit of prayer, the spirit of hope in the midst of a campaign of fear. Peace and love will prevail. That's the idea.
You believe that?
Hashalom Yinatzech. I do believe. I'm praying for peace in every prayer that I say, every single day, over and over again, that the creator of the universe, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will hear our prayers and not allow us to be driven from this land, but to allow us to flourish in this land. Our destiny is to live as neighbors. Whether we like it or not, we are neighbors. So we want the elements of hope and democracy and equality and dignity to prevail, and not fear and hatred and separation.
Today's program highlights both crises and tragedies throughout the region and the world, from Christians who fear another genocide in northeast Syria to Jews mourning yet another victim of a terror attack in Judea and Samaria, and the rise of anti-Semitism around the world. It's important to remember that the psalmist said, "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in times of trouble." Well, that's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.